Hey everybody, Jack Loves Painting here with another tutorial, and today we're going to be doing some fantasy. I've got Throg, the Troll King, and we're going to be doing a really cool Troggoth skin workup. We're doing some fire and ice style skin. It's going to be a really cool effect. It's actually pretty easy to do if you can maintain two things. One is going to be transparency in your paint, and the other is going to be trigger control. We'll talk about that when we get there. But the first step is going to be to do our base coat, and that is royal purple. You can use really any dark purple you want to, and this is going to be a fairly solid base coat over the entire model because purple is going to be our transition color between blue and red. So this purple shadow color is going to let us do two different skin effects on this guy and have them look good next to each other. So it's our transition color. First, we're going to work on the ice. We got some dark gray blue from Pro Acryl. It's a nice kind of stormy blue-gray, and we're going to use this as our first color on the ice buildup. And trolls in Age of Sigmar have this like rocky, spiky flesh that's very stone-like, but on this guy we're going to make it icy. So I'm focusing on the big spikes and the scaly areas on his body and going in and doing a light, semi-transparent coat over those areas so that in the center of those areas where the spikes are kind of clustered up, our blue is more concentrated, and on the edges it's faded out a little bit into that purple. So this is where you need to practice your trigger control. I usually recommend people do this on a scrap piece of paper or maybe like a plastic disposable spoon or something like that if you want to practice on something plastic. So that way you can get that trigger control down and know how to transition those colors out. It's really important for this step. Alright, next we've got some sky blue, also from Pro Acryl. It's a nice light blue. And we're going to be focusing in that blue on those scaly areas, on those spikes. So I'm leaving a little bit of that darker blue showing through and letting that transition show through. And we're just going to build up our blue concentrated on those spikes and scaly areas one more time. So that way we have a nice transition from our dark purple to a dark blue and now to our lighter blue, and we're going to be working in that icy color. For our last blue, I'm pulling out some faded ultramarine. This is a really nice faded baby blue, and I've got it fairly transparent in the airbrush here. And that's just because I want a lot of control. When you're spraying with these really bright, almost white colors, you want to make sure that you have a little bit of wiggle room with the transparency in case you get off target a little bit. And again, I'm focusing even smaller areas right on those spikes, right on those biggest concentrations of the scaly areas, to take that blue to a really cold place and make it look like that ice. So we're going from a dark to a medium to an almost off-white blue to make it look really cold and icy. And you're going to want to check your angles where you're spraying. Constantly be moving the model around and check where your angles are so you're not getting overspray of this white anywhere you don't want it to be. You'll see me a few times during the spray process use my fingers or my thumb as sort of like a masking tape kind of thing, where it's blocking the airflow from getting onto other parts of the model. Finally, I'm pulling out some of this bold titanium white and I'm kind of mixing it into the dregs of that faded ultramarine. So I rinsed it out where only a little bit of that color remains, and then I put a lot of that bold titanium white in there. So there's just the barest amount of that blue left over in this off-white, because I don't want to do 100% pure white. It helps with the gradient if you have a little bit of that color left over. And mostly what I'm focusing on is the spikes themselves, kind of the largest concentrations right in the center of those scaly areas and on the spikes themselves to make those spikes look like icicles almost. Just get that white in there. And it's also going to pop everything out and help that icy look, that cold icy look, kind of come together. All right, now we're gonna bring in some fire. I've got our burnt red from Procurl. This is a nice kind of maroon red. It's very dark. Again, with this step, I wanna make sure that my paint is fairly transparent. So learn how to mix that transparent paint in there with your flow improver. You kind of want something like a 3-to-1 ratio of flow improver to paint. And we're gonna focus on the soft flesh on the model. So his muscles, his belly, his hands, stuff like that. You're gonna come in and again, concentrate the red on the muscles where the highlight would be, and then fade out that red in sort of a transparent way into that purple, so you have that nice purple still left in your shadows to be your transition color from red to blue. And I've shown pretty much everything that I'm doing in this video because it is 100% airbrushing. This is like a single airbrushing step on this model, but this is sort of an advanced technique because of the trigger control, because of making sure that your paints are transparent enough to get the in-between gradient fades between blue and red. So if you're careful and you check your angles and you practice your trigger control and you take your time, this is a really, really cool effect, and it makes for a really awesome fantasy effect because we got this Chaos Troll King guy, this Troggoth guy, who's got the ice, like he's growing ice out of his body, but his soft flesh is like hot, like fire. So he's kind of a contradiction. He's got like two powers in one body, and it looks really, really cool. And this is another step where you're going to want to check your angles. You're going to want to practice holding the model in different ways, spraying the airbrush from different angles on the model, because you want to make sure that when you're blowing that paint, blowing that air over the model, that that air is not going to continue past where you want to spray and get onto our nice, cold, clean, icy areas with that bright off-white. And on this model, even I made some small mistakes. I mean, everybody's human, so it's okay to make some mistakes every now and then. Don't worry, you can fix that. If there's a little tiny bit of overspray on the white spikes, if you mess up an angle, it's fine. You can go back after you finish all the red stuff with that same bright white and redo the tips of those spikes and things like that. Now, if you make a huge mistake and you get red just absolutely everywhere and mess it up, well, unfortunately, you're just going to have to strip the model and start from scratch. That's kind of the double-edged sword of this technique, but it is fixable if you make mistakes. So after we get our first red on there, I'm going to get some bold Pyrrole red. This is a really hot, fiery, kind of fire engine red. I really love this color. It's probably one of my favorite paints from the Pro Acryl set, just because of how vibrant this red is and how easy it sprays. And we're basically going to repeat step 2 that we used on our icy stuff, where I'm taking this brighter, more vibrant red and I'm dialing in the focus on the biggest details, on the biggest slabs of muscle where those highlights would normally be, where we want that flesh to be its brightest, its hottest, and I'm just going to focus that in. Again, you want to maintain trigger control, you want to check your angles so that you're not overspraying anywhere, so you're not focusing on one area and then you realize that, oh, I just sprayed his knuckles, but I also hit his like leg where that icy stuff is. So you want to make use of like a small piece of paper, maybe your thumb, maybe a finger, something like that, where you can hold that up to the model to block that overspray if you're worried about getting it on those areas that we've already airbrushed beforehand. All right, next we're going to get into our final flesh color, and what I do want is a little bit of actual flesh tone in this workup. So I'm taking our bold Pyrrole red, I'm mixing into that bold Pyrrole red some tan flesh, which is your normal kind of peachy flesh color, and a small amount of bright ivory just to make it a little bit more on the bright pastel pink side, so that when we highlight these reds, it's a really bright, vibrant highlight to these reds, but also it has a little bit of that flesh tone. And that helps it look more like flesh. Like your brain is going to look at that color and say, oh, well, that's like a flesh tone on top of that red. So he's got very red, hot, flushed skin instead of just three colors of red on a model that just doesn't really convey that flesh tone. Whenever I'm doing demons or maybe some red-skinned orcs or anything like that where you want to have kind of a reddish flesh tone, you start off with the dark red, then the bright red, and then mix in a little bit of an actual flesh tone color into your final highlights, and it'll look a lot more like a fantasy monster skin tone rather than just a bunch of flat reds gradient on top of an organic model. Like sometimes it doesn't convey the effect that you want it to do. And again, we're just going to focus the smallest areas of highlights on the muscles, work on those details. I'm going to put a little bit more concentration with the flesh tone on stuff like his nose, inside of his ears, on the palms of his hands, and on the bottoms of his feet to make it look more like an actual flesh workup where the skin is going to be a little bit paler in those areas where it's softer. And I got a little bit of overspray on this model. I kind of pointed out in the end. Sometimes it's, really hard to check those angles and make sure you get 100%. So basically what I did is just come back with some of our bold titanium white and very lightly, very carefully touch up some of those spikes and little areas that needed a little bit more white on it. Like it was like his arm and maybe a couple of places on his leg that I just didn't see during the painting process, but it's not that bad if you just practice a little bit. Hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. We're going to be doing more work on this model in the coming days, so make sure to check it out.